So firstly, welcome to Southampton. This is the base city for the Maritime Coastguard Agency, and we do act, as I think you probably know, as the UK maritime regulator for all classes of ship size. We do increasingly some work to develop standards through codes, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I'll talk a little bit more about those in my presentation this morning. But one of the things that we do find encouraging is that some of the standards that we do develop and some of the standards that we apply domestically here in the UK do get taken up internationally, which I think we find that very reassuring, and I think it just tends to suggest that both what we're producing and the approach we're taking to producing it is along the right lines. So if I can get this to move, there we are. It's difficult sometimes when you're in the sort of government role as the MCA is to really understand and discern the state of an industry at any stage. And coming from the commercial sector, I've been quite amazed, I suppose, at how detached sometimes government can be from the real world of commerce and in particular the real world of shipping, because obviously shipping operates at one remove from society generally. But my sense of what's going on in the workboat industry, particularly in the offshore sector more generally, is that some sectors are growing at a very fast rate indeed. And in other areas, there's some real pressure on rates, and there really is a fiercely competitive context out there. And then there's a whole sector, particularly when you get down with the very small vessels and the sort of harbour-related work. None of that really seems to feature in any industry context or any industry commentary that we hear about. Nevertheless, I did attend an offshore conference last month in London. And the evidence from that, I would say, is that the high-tech sectors really are doing well, and the sectors where there is some real advance in technology and there's some real developments in ship types and the types of work that they're doing, and obviously particularly in the offshore renewable sector. And crucially, what came through from that was that the reliable operations, the areas of the industry and the operators who can deliver a very high level of reliability to the companies that they're contracted to work for can actually attract a premium for the work that they do. Conversely, the smaller vessels, the much older vessels, they seem to be finding life a bit more challenging. Now, I don't know really whether that chimes with any reality, but that's the sense that I've picked up. But for the government, particularly for this government in the UK, there is a real emphasis on two aspects really, which I think interest us. First one is that there is a huge interest in small and medium-sized enterprises and using and considering small and medium-sized enterprises as an engine for growth in the future, rather than necessarily the large corporates. And the other really is that this government sees transport generally and shipping in particular as one of the engines for economic growth in the future. And in particular for shipping, particularly for large shipping, large internationally trading ships if you like, it sees those as an engine for economic growth because of its ability to sustain a really vibrant maritime sector in the country, and in particular a vibrant sector in London by comparison with some of the ambitious and highly energetic sectors that we're seeing in other parts of the world, particularly places like Singapore. So there really is quite a strong support within this country in our government for support for the industry. And one of the things that follows on from that is this idea of code-based regulation. And one of the aspects of support for small and medium-sized enterprises is the idea that so far as possible, government will just get out of the way and it will just create something that works for the industry, is very simple and easy to understand, give industry the chance to contribute to its development. In some cases, in some quite small sectors, give industry the chance to actually produce the codes themselves. And it is very attractive for a number of reasons. For policy officials, for the people, some of the people who work for me, we're obviously very heavily conditioned these days to producing goal-based regulations, and codes are a very good way of developing some goal-based regulation, because not only can it achieve the goals in an outcome-based fashion, but it is also obviously quite flexible and can be very adaptive as things change. For us, however, we do have to then stand back at some point and say, yes, but actually there is an underlying regulatory objective that needs to be achieved here. And for us, the important aspect there is that whatever you do with a code, it must achieve substantial equivalence. So say it's attractive to government because it's deregulatory, attractive to our government because it's deregulatory. I know not all governments are keen on deregulation. Some actually prefer the alternative. But in this country, we have had this piece of work going on for a while now, which is the red tape challenge, which is just trying to deregulate sectors and trying to place more of the emphasis on self-regulation and leaving sectors to act with a very good basis of self-regulation, which they have a hand in developing and which can provide an alternative to regulation. Some areas that's working really well indeed. In other areas, it's not working quite so well, I would say. But nevertheless, successful development of that approach does really rely on quite a strong partnership. And I'd say something I'll come to a bit later, a partnership, whether that partnership is based on trust or whether it's based on a pact. And I think you know, in various areas it works differently. For the UK, I mean, we've got the various codes that we have. We've also got MGN 280, which I think many people consider that to be a harmonised code. A few years ago, we got quite a strong sense from industry, from the consulting groups that we were working with, quite a strong sense that they would have preferred just a single harmonised small commercial vessel code covering all types of vessel. We did a lot of work on that. We put a huge amount of effort into it, and we did actually get what you could identify as a single harmonised commercial vessel code. And we got to the point where we were just ready to sort of go out and consult on this quite seriously before moving it forward to put it into legislation. And some sectors of industry seemed to get cold feet, and they said, well, hang on a minute, no, we're not quite sure about this harmonised code. Actually, we do quite like the individual codes for a number of reasons. And so that paused us really to stop and think. And so we did actually then undo a lot of that work, and we said, well, actually, no, if that's what industry wants, then actually we will stick with the individual codes. And one of the first of the new additions off the blocks is the new workboat code, which is being launched this week at Seawork. It does supersede the previous edition of the Brown Code. This has been developed very closely with industry, and in particular with the National Workboat Association. It has been, following that sort of reversal from the large harmonised code, it has been rewritten and edited quite rapidly in conjunction with the National Workboat Association and other partners being part of that work. And crucially, like all codes, as well as providing that substantial equivalence to the underlying standard, it is something that provides a basis for regulation and a basis for assurance that is proportionate to the risks involved, which is in the sense that it goes into enough detail, but is written in plain English. It's not written in any kind of legal construction. It's capable of being interpreted by practitioners. I have to say the lawyers don't really like that approach. The lawyers would much rather write law, which is capable of strict interpretation and is absolutely certain and leaves nobody any doubt about what the requirements are. But I think, as we all know, the reality is when you deal with ships and boats, that doesn't work. What does the Brown Code do then? Well, it is entirely revised and updated. It brings into the Brown Code, the reference obviously to offshore renewables and wind farm construction and servicing. Stability is a big issue. I think stability is becoming an increasingly significant issue, not just in the workboat sector, but in many sectors of the shipping industry, whether we're dealing with the very large passenger ships or whether we're dealing with small fishing vessels. Multi-hulls obviously have different stability behaviours, so it provides alternative stability for multi-hulls. Provides linkages to the other industry guides and codes, which is our way really of overcoming this single harmonised code issue. It's being launched this week, as I say, for reasons that I won't go into here, other than to say it just takes ages to turn something into law in this country. It's being launched by the National Workboat Association. It is not something that will have the force of law from the get-go, if you like. We will be bringing it into law in due course, but for the time being, the code that is being launched will act as a substantial equivalence to legislation. So you're quite safe to use it going forward. What do I see happening in the sector? What do some of my colleagues in the MCA sense is happening in the sector? We sense that the sector is becoming quite stratified. And increasingly this stratification is happening as a result of the types of contracts that are being made in the industry for the types of work that need to be done, but also increasingly the demand for increasing vessel sizes and working further offshore and scale of operation. And we're seeing some of the investment going into the industry being in these really quite cutting-edge high-tech vessels, made of composite materials and composite structures. They're rammed full of technology and manoeuvring systems and automation, and they really are, I think the leading edge probably of the maritime industry generally, not just the leading edge of the offshore or workboat sector. At the other end of the scale, we see in the sector some of these very elderly vessels, vessels which are literally in their second or even third incarnation, really operating quite close to the margins of probably economic utility and probably operating close to the margins of the economy. And sometimes the sense that you get from some of those vessels is actually they're operating right on or beyond the margins of safe operation, which is what gives me cause for concern, and it's one of the many things that keep me awake at night. There is no doubt that operating the new vessels requires quite high levels of skill, and I think increasingly training and demonstration of competence to operate those vessels. On the other hand, at the other end of the scale, I think the consequences of failure and accidents are likely to become more visible, and I sense also more expensive as time goes on. In the offshore sector, you may be aware of this, we've obviously got this Brown Code at the moment, which being relaunched this week, really does deal with the non-convention size vessels, less than 24 metres, carrying fewer than 12 passengers. The demand is for larger vessels that go further offshore and they go faster and they carry more people. For the time being, once you get over 24 metres, as you know, you're into SOLAS convention size vessels. You're actually then into a passenger ship or you're actually operating with a vessel that needs to fulfil the requirements of the high-speed code. And neither of those really fit, neither of the passenger ship standards or the high-speed code really fit with the types of vessels that are coming into this sector. And so what we're seeing coming out of the IMO in the future is this offshore service craft code. So a new code coming out of the IMO, sitting alongside the offshore vessel code and the special purpose ship code. And it kind of recognises that gap between the special purpose ship and the offshore vessel code and those other codes I've shown there. Qualifications is quite key in the sector. We know the sort of industry's grown up from a collection of varying individuals, whether coming in from deep sea, individuals coming off coastal trades, individuals coming out of the fishing industry. And what we see is this need for standards to be raised generally and for more trained, more competent people to be working in the industry. We did have this 200-ton certificate. We still have a 200-ton certificate actually, but what industry was saying is actually that's not sufficient anymore. We need more than that. We need to provide an alternative. And so one of the things we did was we developed this under 500-ton qualification. Introduced it last year. I think it came into force last October. And it is a certificate that actually has full STCW recognition. And what it does really, and crucial to the way we're approaching, I think, everything now in the MCA, is to, provide really flexible routes of entry to people coming into the industry. And so you can start with the existing 200-ton qualification, or you can start here with an Officer of the Watch Unlimited certificate, or you can start with an Officer of the Watch on yachts, 3,000 gross tons. So 5 different ways in to getting to this Master Workboat under 500-ton certificate. And we expect over time that will actually become the de facto standard qualification in the offshore industry. Really does provide quite a clear pathway for individuals to develop a career in the offshore industry rather than this industry, workboat industry or the offshore industry, being something people do sort of at the end of their career without any real structure to their work. It's clearly set out in our publication MGN 496. What about the ships then? As I say, codes really are intended to provide this one-stop shop. So rather than needing to go to lots of legislation and lots of regulations, it should all be in this one publication. Risk-based approach should allow us as regulators to delegate oversight and surveillance to other organisations, independent third-party organisations such as the IIMS. And as I say, it sits quite neatly with UK government policy to deregulate, to develop the idea of self-regulation in sectors, and as I say, apply regulations in a very straightforward, easy to understand way, hopefully without too much ambiguity. It is built on some kind of contract though, some kind of psychological contract if you like, and I think depending on your point of view, this is either that everyone in the industry can trust each other or there's some kind of pact between us. Because it does really rely on an industry sector itself really behaving very diligently and taking its responsibilities very seriously. And crucially, in line with the standards that we're all accustomed to working with now, QA systems and ISO systems, the idea is that things operate in the agreed way to the agreed standard every time that work is done. Sectors need to make their own arrangements for training and quality assurance, and also the industry needs to have some way of applying sanctions for failure or breach. There need to be some consequences of not applying rules properly. And the deal is essentially an industry which can operate like that in exchange. Government will really operate with a light touch, and crucially won't seek to intervene. It won't seek to sort of keep introducing new regulations or trying to get in the way. And if it goes wrong, unfortunately, because of the world we live in these days, we see these strident calls for something to be done. Someone's calling for this, or someone's calling for a regulation on that. There has been a failure, it hasn't worked. Government then says, well, actually, we tried it, it didn't work, now we've got to go back in and intervene. And that's obviously quite unsatisfactory from our point of view, because it doesn't need to be like that if it operates properly. But on the other hand, against these strident demands and this need for accountability and responsibility, I think we find ourselves in a position where we have an alternative. Much better, in our view, and I'm sure in the view of any industry sector, not to get to that position in the first place, not to have to defend it. Because one of the consequences that flows from that, and I think as we're seeing now with schools particularly, and the National Health Service, the expectation is then that the government will also perform the monitoring, which we've sort of moved away from doing that. It's not the game we're in anymore. Can I just finish? This is the last slide, thank you. Or last penultimate slide, thank you. So what do we say about the future in the MCA? We would encourage certifying authorities, such as the IIMS, to really continue with the good work that you're doing. And in particular, your organisation, I think continue with your programmes of training, qualification, professional development. There's real value in that from our perspective. But we would also suggest that you get ready for things to get a bit more complicated. We live in societies internationally, certainly live in a society here in the UK, where there is just no toleration of failure, particularly if failure causes loss of life or, in particular, pollution. And when you look at some of the contractual arrangements in the industry now, where you've got large corporations contracting with quite small entities, there needs to be a close alignment between the systems that those companies work with and the way they work together. Because we know large corporations, they have zero tolerance of any lost time incidents or injuries. And crucially, they don't want anything and they don't want anybody working for them that is going to cause them damage to their reputation. It really is becoming very evident. But nevertheless, we think the future is going to be bright. There really are huge opportunities in your sector and in the offshore sectors more generally. But I think in the longer term, if you're really going to make the most of them, I think it's going to require a different approach. There is going to need to be an increased provision of assurance and governance. And I think, as I view the structure of the certifying authorities, and I sort of relate that to classification societies generally, and I relate it to regulators, I can see a need perhaps in the future, probably not now, but in the longer term, where certifying authorities may need to develop some kind of corporate personality rather than being some association or loose coalition. Perhaps that organisations can be absolutely clear about the accountability for performance of anything that they put their name to. There needs to be some kind of responsibility for failure. And I think also, potentially, there's a risk of needing to assume some liability for damage. I know, looking at your agenda, you had quite a lot on insurance and PI yesterday, and I don't know whether that fits in. Thank you. So, message I leave you with, the Darwinian quote, often quoted as, it's the survival of the fittest. Actually, that was a misquote. What Darwin actually said was what I've put up there. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. Thank you.